to talk about something that actually just happened. I don't know, earlier this evening, which is a little exchange, and it's a small thing. It's a Twitter exchange, but I think it's interesting, at least as a jumping off point for talking about more important things, with a fellow named James Lindsay, scourge of critical race theory, or what he imagines critical race theory to be, and Marxism, or what he imagines Marxism to be. And also axe enthusiast. You can find that online. James Lindsay showing off his skills with his axe. But yeah, do we have the original Lindsay tweet? So that this tweet says critical race theory, stages of history. By the way, he claims to be a world level expert on critical race theory, which I guess means that the only people who get to push back are like galaxy level experts or universe level experts.
That's why we're taking him on.
If he was a world expert, that would be a problem, because the only person who I know who's a world expert is my wife. So
there you go.
Good plug for Andy's wife.
Yes.
So critical race theory stages of history: 1, primitive equity; 2, slavery; 3, segregation and apartheid; 4, colorblind equality; 5, racial equity; in parentheses, dictatorship of the anti-racists; 6, racial justice. So, of course, what he's doing here is he's taking the sort of schematic version of the Marxist, theory of history. You start out with primitive communism. You have like tribal societies that don't have that haven't been divided into a class of producers and a ruling class. So that's primitive communism, and then you have you've got like ancient Rome style, like ancient slave societies and feudalism and capitalism, and then eventually, inshallah, socialism. So he's, the point of it's like kind of clever by the standards of what he's doing, is to do what he always does, which is to say critical race theory is basically like Marxism. So I happened to be on Twitter and see that, and so I responded to it. That's the second tweet, to say this is basically an update of Jordan Peterson's Marxism equals postmodernism equals censorious blue-haired college kids thesis, with a little bit more effort put into explaining it, which actually makes it even goofier. So straightforward. And then he quote tweeted that. So that's the third one. Says, I just realized that they mad, not they're mad, by the way, they mad.
Oh, they big mad.
They mad about that tweet. Of course they are. Lol, target symbol. To which I finally replied, and I have oddly not gotten an answer to this yet.
I think it's a bullseye. He's implying he bullseyed us.
Yes. Yeah. So I reply, they, in this case, meaning people who actually know what Marxism is and are thus know how absurd it is to equate it with critical race theory, and to equate that in turn with every vaguely woke race-related things that bugs you. But more than happy to have an off-Twitter conversation about this with you, James. And oddly enough, despite his earlier participation in the interaction, he let that one go. Maybe he's mulling it. But I just wanted to say a few things about this because, James Lindsay is one of the leading lights of the movement to freak everybody out about critical race theory on the right. I guess Chris Rufo is maybe eclipsed him as the even bigger spokesman of that, but otherwise it's pretty much Lindsay. And so this is something everybody on the right is fixated on now. Because this is their culture war obsession of the week, that they're trying to teach your kids critical race theory in high school, and God knows what that'll lead to. And on the left, there are a few different ways that people have responded. One of which, and this one is kind of fair, is to say they're not really teaching critical race theory in high schools. Critical race theory is something that really is mostly taught in law schools a little bit, to undergrads, because it comes out of critical legal studies. and from Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw, other figures kind of developing and out of that tradition. And that's kind of true, although it is probably true that there's some, anti-racist pedagogy that might, make its way to high school here and there that is influenced, by CRT ideas. And I wouldn't lean too hard on totally nothing that's ever taught in any high school, has anything in common with what anything CRT theorists are saying. They're not teaching Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw in high school, but there might be some affinity with some stuff and the level of ideas. But then oftentimes the way that people on the left will reply to it is by saying, no, this is what they're upset about is just history, like U.S. history classes teaching that like racism existed and was a big deal in American history or something like that, even though obviously that's not a new development. That as we just established, Andy and I both went to high school in the Neolithic period, and it's not like they didn't like talk about the civil rights movement and stuff like that in high school. Certainly if you lived in the state that I did, you had annual Martin Luther King Day assemblies and all of that stuff. But then I think there are really two different issues that deserve to be separated here. Maybe three, which to run through them really quickly, so we can talk about them before Larry comes on, are one, the sort of heavy-handed attempt at legislative censorship directed at CRT, or at what people vaguely imagine CRT is, which even if the specific stuff that might be pissing them off isn't just acknowledging that racism exists in history class, that doesn't mean that broadly written laws in some of these states won't in fact make it more difficult to talk about racism in history class, because sometimes it varies from state to state, but sometimes the language is vague. And in any case, I mean, empowering censors always leads to tons of stupid censorship that might even be pretty distant from the original purpose. I mean, just look at what, I mean, Andy had, Facebook suspended him for sharing a article written by a very mild-mannered fellow. He was on the show last week, Nathan Robinson, which we can, I think we have the graphic of. That was bullying, which is a small example of how empowering censors leads to like crazy censorship that has nothing to do with the original alleged point, just routinely, because you're empowering people to make these decisions. Oftentimes bureaucrats will err on the side of like a very broad interpretation. So I think the censorship is very bad and should be opposed, right? That's the first thing. But then the second thing is, okay, but how about critical race theory itself, the actual theory? Like, is that good or bad, or a mixture? And a lot of people on the left have the impulse to sort of look the way culture wars work. If the other team puts a plus on something, you put a minus. If they put a minus, you put a plus. So I think a lot of people get very defensive about anything that they see as being attacked by the right. And then the third related issue is how should we what should we make of this equation that Lindsay keeps on doing and Rufo keeps on doing between critical race theory and Marxism? Because like short version of the hot take, I think that like Lindsay and Rufo are out of their minds on this subject. The two have very little to do with each other. And as such, being a Marxist, I am a bit critical of critical race theory for Adolf Reedish sort of anti-essentialist reasons, and to understand how this works, like why this is what that criticism looks like. I think it is good to have as a starting point Nathan's article, because most people with strong opinions about this stuff, pro or con, don't really know, certainly on the level of academic theory or literature, what critical race theory is. And if you want to know what critical race theory is, I think Nathan's article is a great place to start. I think he lays a lot of it out very, very clearly, and has a lot of the virtues that I really appreciate in Nathan's writing. He's always clear. He's always very explicit about what his argument is. I remember Micah Utrecht put it to me once that, it's like so many people writing about something, the tone of it is, hey, I know all about this, so I'm going to generously let you in on it. Whereas with Nathan, the tone is often more like, hey, I'm figuring this stuff out, but I'm going to sort of like let you in on my thought process as I figure it out, which I think is a really useful way to write about something like this. But reading the article, I think actually makes it a little clear both why Lindsay is a complete lunatic on this stuff, but also why why I think there is like a good Marxist anti-essentialist critique to be made of some of these ideas. So basically the core of what critical race theory is it starts from an absolutely correct observation, which is that the achievement of formal legal equality between the races in the 1960s did not end racial disparities. Most obviously in policing, incarceration, and really underlying that, poverty. That those were not ended by having formal legal equality of opportunity. That there's some other problem here. And if you're not going to go all bell curve on it, or you're not going to have some kind of, goofy culturalist explanation about how people just need to pull their pants up or something, then that has to do with some sort of social structure. So far, so good, right? Nothing in any of what I just said is wrong. But I think to kind of see how, why, contrary to what Lindsay is saying, that there is going to be some divide between Reed-style anti-essentialist Marxists and critical race theorists, I think a really good starting point is where Nathan starts in the article. This short story written by Derek Bell, one of the main founding fathers of critical race theory, called The Space Traders, which is about some aliens who come to Earth and basically decide that they want to like re-enslave all the black people, and that if the white people will sell them all the black people to take away, they'll share, I don't know, alien technology or some sort of bounty with Earth, and then there's a secret ballot, and the white people vote to sell the black people to the aliens. That's the end of the story. And the thing is, and so in Nathan's explanation, he said, his first reaction when he had to read this in like law school was, it's a little goofy. First of all, as literature, it feels like a short story written by a law professor, and then secondly, although he certainly agrees with all the stuff I just laid out, it seems to sort of misrepresent like how racism really works now. It's a sort of unhelpful, exaggeration of it. But then he said the more he thought about it, the more he decided that the story, that the lesson of the story was right. After all, think about all these racial disparities, from policing to healthcare to wage levels to everything else, and the ways that they result in many black people dying earlier than the average of everybody. And so, isn't this essentially being willing to trade black lives for other social benefits of keeping certain structures in place? And this at last gets us to the critical nub, which is, I think, a very simple way of seeing the point is, well, hold on. If we are metaphorically selling a lot of the black population to the space traders, which sure, in a sense we are also selling a pretty big chunk of the non-black population to the space traders. And we're not selling all the black population to space traders, because prejudice might impact people, but as far as what Nathan's talking about, these disparities that that impact lives, Barack Obama and Kanye West are not impacted by that, right? Oprah is not impacted by that. Whereas lots of white people in the Rust Belt and the Appalachians and everywhere, right? But I mean, those let's let those two stand in symbolically, are impacted by it, and lots of people of other races are being sold to the space traders in this metaphor, because the real thing is that it's not just saying here's this category called race that is this sort of primary explanatory thing, gets your eye off the actual ball, which is capitalism. That, of course, we have these racial disparities. The number of people being sold to the space traders are disproportionately black, because the way that just regular capitalist property relations freeze in place the results of past legal apartheid up until the 1960s, later in some ways, So of course, that's what accounts for that disparity. But the basic thing is not the disparity. The basic thing is that anybody is being sold to the space traders. That's a problem that Black people are disproportionately more likely than some of the groups to have. But it's a problem for everybody who's being sold to the space traders. And there's a solution for everybody, which is to see it as a common problem and to have working class solidarity to I don't know, blow up the spaceship. At this point, the metaphor's slipping, but that would be my critique of what CRT actually is.
Right. Well, and part of it also is just, because the vast majority of people who are not the Twitter intellectuals or the politicians, the vast majority of people, ordinary people who are thinking about critical race theory right now, like their principal objection to it is not, it's not about a legal interpretation or a Marxist, that it's not Marxist enough or something. Obviously, what most people take away from this is, professors are saying that we're all racist and we're bad people. And so the way it filters into the culture war is just, it's another instantiation of professional people bullying working people from the working class perspective on this. And so I think the left's argument against this is to say, we're not engaging in the culture war. It's not worth it when conservatives say, one thing that we should automatically switch and say the opposite. That's just so not true. It's because then we're going to end up, because the dominant alternative is typically going to be liberalism, and it's not going to be a sufficient answer for these problems. But for most working people, I think it's fine to say you're not just irredeemably racist. You're not a horrible, terrible, bad person. Most of you are probably pretty good people who have morals, who care about other people, who care about their family and want good outcomes for others. The big kind of insight that the left has made when it comes to ideologies of oppression is the fact that ideologies have to have a material base, and that since the civil rights movement, where Jim Crow and political segregation has been done away with, the reason why there are persistent inequities when it comes to race is economic. These are economic differences when it comes to healthcare, housing, job markets, and that's where it's
even policing. It's
right.
certainly not the case that because the problem is when you have this sort of analysis that there's this some sort of oftentimes not really well defined category called race that you presumably don't mean something biological, but then what do you mean? And then I think what people are really talking about are what's sometimes called P plus P, prejudice plus power, which is basically
right.
Decision makers make decisions on the racial prejudice, which certainly does happen. That is part of the problem. There are definitely there's lots of statistical evidence you can look at, in terms of decision making by police officers, for example, that supports that, or other kinds of decision makers in other contexts. But that's not the main reason for the disparities in policing and incarceration. The main reason for the disparities in policing and incarceration, never mind the rest of this, is that that kind of aggressive militarized policing is primarily a problem in poor neighborhoods. And Black people are disproportionately likely to live in poor neighborhoods because of everything that you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And this is if people want to say it became kind of fashionable for a while to say, race is a social construct. And it's okay, if that's the term you want to use to describe race, fine. But the social and the social construct, the social is referring to society. It's referring to predominantly economic categories. When you say there's a racial disparity, it's not that race has a life unto its own. It's that it points to other actual material factors, because race is not a real thing. There's no such
Right.
thing as like actual race in biological terms. If it's like socially constructed, it's because it's like pointing to geography, it's pointing to phenotypes, it's pointing to economics. There is in fact no real divisions among human beings, and so like the left's project has to be, just wiping away of like these massive inequities. Not that everyone's going to end up in like perfectly, everyone gets exactly the same amount of income or something, but like there shouldn't be, as like at the level of categories of people, there should not be inequities. And that's also going to mean down the line, like, we want to move as far away as we can from a racial worldview where we arbitrarily categorize people into these, well, you're white because XYZ, you're black because XYZ, that we see, pigment as the predominant means of categorizing people.
Yeah, I mean, or some weird combination of ancestry and like I'm not sure exactly what. Like I've seen like leftists having like discussions about whether like Jewish people or like Ashkenazi Jewish people are objectively white or not. It's like, man, this sounds like a discussion the far right would be having, right? Like,
Yeah.
because the obvious answer is no, because nobody is, because there's no such thing. But